Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Erika Shershun, who's here to share with us her new books, Healing Sexual Trauma Guided Journal, Writing and Somatic Practices to help you process, heal, and feel safe, and Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook, Somatic Skills to help you feel safe in your body, create boundaries, and live with resilience. Are you experiencing the lingering impacts of sexual trauma in your life and you're just wondering how to truly heal? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Erika Shershun is a somatic psychotherapist who specializes in helping trauma survivors reclaim the life they're meant to live. She's the author of Healing Sexual Trauma Guided Journal, Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook, Create Boundaries and Live with Resilience, and the PESI Sexual Trauma Clinical Training. Her approach is trauma-informed, rooted in somatic practices, drawing on neuroscience and integrative modalities such as EMDR, brain spotting, energy psychology, mindfulness, self-compassion, and parts work. Erika values diversity, offers individual online therapy sessions in California, and provides coaching to clients outside of the state. So welcome to the show, Erika Shershun.
Thank you, Marianne.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about, both your books. So what inspired you to write the guided journal?
So, the guided journal is a very gentle approach to healing from sexual trauma. It's not easy to do the work of healing trauma, and it's nice to be able to go at your own pace and be able to put down your thoughts. And at the same time, the journal's filled uh, with practices to help you along the healing journey and a lot of important information that will help you to understand why you're experiencing some of the symptoms you might be experiencing and why you might be feeling some of the painful feelings that are coming up for you.
So now, does this journal help people who are also having like those repetitive kind of relationships in life? They're picking the wrong person all the time.
Well, unresolved trauma can definitely be at the root of that. So I would say yes. Yes. There's so many things that the unresolved trauma can cause. So I talk about them as symptoms, but a lot of times people aren't identifying these things as symptoms. And, for that reason, I have a blog post that goes into the symptoms. It's a pretty lengthy list and it's divided into 6 categories. And, there's other things that could be added to it. I'm always adding to it, honestly. So it can be helpful to read over that because I come into contact with people all the time who had no idea that some of the things they're experiencing could be considered symptoms.
Oh, wow. That's just interesting. And as people are on this journey for healing, I'm sure that you see a lot of things come up that they're like, they're surprised at, as you're saying, their symptoms.
Yes, yeah. It's really profound how it impacts the entirety of a person. There's so many ways it can show up. Yeah, it can definitely play out in things like attracting the wrong person or, being drawn to people that take advantage of you, that sort of thing. But not only, that's one direction it can go in. And, often that comes out of having developed a fawn response in relation to the traumas. And that is pretty common with childhood survivors, but can also happen with adult survivors. So, and that's also known as please and appease, just being agreeable. And part of that is the survivor doesn't have the opportunity to develop empowered boundaries that are so important relationally. We're always navigating boundaries, whether we're doing it intentionally or not, and not intentionally doing it can lead to all sorts of issues.
Well, I know your book it works off of somatic therapy. And for people who are new to that, can you explain what that is?
So it's body based. So it's a holistic approach. It's somatic therapists are also working with the brain, of course, and emotions, but they're recognizing that what shows up in the body is also equally important. So the sensations that show up, those are messengers in terms of what we're experiencing, just as emotions are. And it's a valuable source of healing. So the information it brings to the healing is of value. So um, a piece of that is understanding some of the patterns that your body has developed over time in response to traumas. If you only work with the thoughts, you're not helping to change the pattern. So if the pattern still comes up in response to a trigger, say, no matter how hard you have worked to change the thoughts, you're going to still go right back there because you're still doing that pattern physically. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the piece that trauma. So trauma's overwhelm to your system, and when you experience a traumatic event, you encode memory differently than when you experience just a non-traumatic event. So if you have a happy memory of, say, Christmas when you were 5, or whatever that memory is, and you draw that up, and it will play kind of like a movie in your mind. But when you go through a traumatic event, it doesn't encode that way. You don't have what's called an episodic memory that plays like a movie in your mind, and you predominantly are going to encode trauma through implicit memory, which is emotional memories and also procedural memories, and that includes sensations. So that is part of how it ties in. And you can think of those sensations as little landmines that can get triggered. So you might not understand why you're getting triggered because you don't remember that aspect, but it can be anything. Like it could be that there was a fan in the room when you went through the assault, and having walking into a room with a fan might trigger you, and if you don't remember that there was a fan in that room initially, you have no idea what's triggering you. And so sometimes people remember, sometimes they don't. It can show up in your body, the trigger. And part of the healing work I do with clients is to use EMDR to nullify those triggers so that it doesn't happen anymore. They're neutralized, so they don't continue to get triggered by anything related to that traumatic event.
So, when we do the journaling, is there some type of healing that takes place from that transference?
Yes, journaling is um, really helpful. So a lot of survivors of sexual trauma struggle to feel safe or safe enough in the early stages of healing. And they may be so used to feeling this way that they're not even aware that they feel unsafe until invited to bring their attention inward. And that can feel overwhelming in the beginning. So as a result of that, the healing work has to begin with supporting them in establishing a felt sense of relatively relative safety. And both of my books start out with that. And then adding the structured journaling promotes self reflection, it deepens exploration, it provides survivors with needed containment to aid in establishing that sense of safety. And then it can help with internalized stigma, self blame, shame that are really common experience by most, if not all, of sexual assault survivors. And research shows that that is reduced through journaling. Um, it can help to create a cohesive narrative over time of the trauma, which is a piece of healing, a very important piece of healing. There are many ways that journaling helps. So, those are just a few of them. It definitely helps cognitive function and negative impacts of stress and improves the immune system for a few other things. So,
Hmm.
there's many benefits.
Well, and I understand, I mean, because feeling safe must be on like the top, as far as the list of something that people are concerned about as they're going through this process. So, how does this guided journal help them with that?
So I have some practices, but also just the psychoeducation about why that's so important and what throws that off. So I go into all of that, but the practices are so important to help with that, to establish that. And the people I work with that do these practices on a regular basis improve much quicker than people who resist. So it helps in that way as well as all the ways we just talked about that journaling helps.
So, I'd like to touch on your first book for a moment, Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook. I know earlier you talked about boundaries. How can people who maybe are new to setting boundaries or struggle with setting boundaries, how can they begin that process?
First, I think it's good to just start with helping them to understand why boundaries are important because a lot of people think making boundaries is not a good thing. and um, And like I said earlier, we're always making boundaries, whether we're conscientious of it or not. So, just helping them understand the different types of boundaries that we make often on a daily basis, and the importance of it, so that they buy into wanting to make boundaries. And then I go into making them somatically, making them energetically, making them implicitly or explicitly, and making them verbally. There's a chapter in the workbook devoted to boundary making.
I found the workbook to be so impactful. I mean, you go into things like moving beyond feelings of shame and fear and guilt. And so, for folks that are trying to like reclaim their sense of self, what would you recommend?
I think that reclaiming the sense of self is a process, and that comes a little bit further into the work often. That again, we have to start out with establishing a felt sense of safety or relative safety. And then we want to look at how to regulate the nervous system, which is so important. So once we've gone into that a bit, then we can get more into establishing a sense of self. And it tends to happen organically, honestly, in the healing after we've addressed things like shame. So being able to begin to trust in the self again, or maybe for the first time ever, helps with that quite a bit. And I address it in different ways in each book. So in the journal, there's a segment that goes into trust toward the back of the book. There's a lot about grief in the workbook. The journal has some on that as well, but sometimes that's a piece of it as well. So, and grief always comes up as part of the process of healing trauma. So, when shame and grief are cleared out, and that sense of relative safety and self agency through understanding how to regulate your nervous system are on board, it really tends to happen organically.
So, for folks that have already gone through and done the work in Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook, would it be beneficial for them then to pick up the new book, Healing Sexual Trauma Guided Journal, and start that process there too?
Absolutely. If they're still experiencing any symptoms that, if it's still upsetting for them to talk about the trauma, if they're struggling in any way still around the trauma, I would highly recommend they go through the journal.
In your books, you talk about cultivating self compassion. Why is that so important?
Well, it's a big part of the healing. It has a lot to do with shame. If we can't take in love for ourselves, it's really hard to take in love from others and to feel a sense of belonging. And like you asked about cultivating a sense of self, like it plays into so many different aspects of that. It's a foundational practice because there's so much that you're cut off from without having a sense of compassion. And part of what happens to survivors of any type of intense trauma is that they can constrict around their heart. So that can be called a heart wall or a shield. But that constricting around the heart, if you think about a baby and like something bad is happening to them, they have no way to defend except to constrict, right? So, it might not be a full on trauma, but something unpleasant, um, and they'll develop this pattern of tightening the muscles around the heart and as a way to try to protect because they have no other way to protect. And so, some of these patterns we've developed as infants, and sometimes it comes on later, but a lot of survivors have a hard time taking in the compassion at first because of that tendency to try to protect their heart. Of course, it doesn't really work in the long run. We can't really protect our heart that way, but it's all we have, right? As a young child or baby is to constrict somewhere. So once we're able to soften around our heart centers, we're able to begin to take that in. And that can sort of happen simultaneously. And it's life changing when someone goes from having no self compassion to being able to receive that from themselves and then to connect with others and receive it from others.
Do victims of sexual trauma tend to blame themselves? And if so, is that a roadblock that they have to work through?
Yes. Very few do not blame themselves on some level. And it might be that they blame their body because they froze. They might blame themselves because they had a drink out at a bar with a friend and talked to what ended up being the wrong person who drugged their drink or whatever happened. They blame themselves for any reason. And it's really sad um, because they're never to blame. none of them invited this to happen to them. None of them gave permission for this to happen to them. That's why it's trauma. So they're never at fault. And it's the person who perpetrated the act who's at fault and whose shame it is. But uh, nonetheless, everyone struggles with it pretty much. And that is why shame is a big part of the healing. Yeah, there's so much to say about that too.
Do you have stats for people in the US who have experienced sexual trauma? Because I just have a feeling this encompasses so much more than people think.
Well, the general stats most of them say 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. So it's quite a bit. It's probably higher than that, honestly. There's so much that doesn't go reported. I know in some countries it's 50% of women, the stats say. So um, yeah, it's pretty up there.
Well, it's so nice to have a resource that people can use to start their healing process because I mean, this is such a personal thing. Maybe someone's not ready to talk to a professional about it, but being able to have a guided journal or workbook is a good place to start.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people bring it into their therapy sessions, and a lot of therapists use the workbook with their clients. So it is definitely a starting place. And yeah, I feel like there's so much more to say about shame that I'm wanting to add to that, but I'm just at a loss of where to begin. So I just think it's important that listeners take away that it's not their fault, and that when they do the healing work, they'll come to understand that and to really embody that.
Well, how empowering is that? I mean, your work is so profound. Where can our readers and listeners connect with you and learn more about your books and be part of your community?
So they can connect with me at healingsexualtrauma.com. And the first chapter of the workbook is available for free to download there, as well as a book called The Many Ways to Ground, a little ebook. And then they can also connect with me at erikashershun.therapy.com. That would be my website if they are interested in working with me as a therapist or as a coach.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I really appreciate your invitation to be here. I'm grateful to speak with your audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Erica. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your books, Healing Sexual Trauma Guided Journal and Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook. Both books are available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Make sure to visit Erika's website at erikashershuntherapy.com for more information on her work and how you can make an appointment. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.